experts to join us as we look at this broad and complex issue of unlocking community value, supporting and funding community infrastructure to empower social purpose. It's a long title, and I make no apologies for that, because we're trying to draw together a series of different kind of projects, events, and experience today to talk about different ways that we can really drive that social value into and through our communities in our city. And it would be wrong of me not to, at this point, just to mention our thanks as ever to our sponsors, because it's not possible without some of that funding support. So to SWPA, and particularly our thanks today to Urban Splash, who have come in to support the Expo and this particular event. And before we get into the actual webinar itself, I'm just going to hand over briefly to David Warburton, the Land Director at Urban Splash, just to give us a bit of a welcome and introduction itself to Urban Splash. David, over to you.
Oh, that's great. Thanks very much, Jez. So I think the first thing to say is here at Urban Splash, the whole team is absolutely delighted to be able to support this really, really critical event, which comes at a really important time in the whole sort of thought process around development, regeneration right across the country. So a big thank you to everyone on the call who's attending, and of course to all the panelists for the contributions we're about to hear. Just a few words on Urban Splash. So we've been around for about 30 years now, and we have focused on creating places and communities rather than developments and estates. We help people live well by design. We help people be green by default. And we also help people to love thy neighbour, as we say. We've delivered around 5,000 homes and about 2 million square feet of workspace in new revitalised neighbourhoods right around the country. We've activated people and communities as part of this, so not just activating spaces, we've activated people as well. And this activation, this community and people activation, I think really lies at the heart of our efforts to deliver true community engagement, participation, and to empower social purpose and social value. So I'm really looking forward to listening to the session today, and really to understand other people's experience around the whole agenda of empowering social purpose, and really to understand how both we, but maybe the broader development industry could do even better going forward. Thanks very much, Jez.
Well, David, thank you. And certainly I will say that one of the things we're looking at, as you will know, at the Bristol Housing Festival, is the role of modern methods of construction to help with that. And I've been very impressed with some of the work that Urban Splash are doing in that area as well. So there's more to come, I'm sure, in the UK as we see that develop. And it's great to see you championing that role as well. Just to flag, this is part of a series of events. So today's event will be recorded. So if you have not got a chance to see the whole event, or you've got other people that you think would be interested to see this, please do. You'll be able to connect with this on YouTube and send it on to people afterwards. And as we go through the event, there is a Q&A panel. So please do feel free to drop questions in as you go, as thoughts fire in your mind or things you want to disagree with. Today's idea is just an informal conversation. We want this to be useful for you as we showcase some of the thinking and some of the projects taking place in Bristol. The final thing before we get into the panel is just to say this, that we are part of this series of events. So for example, tomorrow, we have another event taking place in person. So a chance to come and physically be with friends and other people across Bristol, building tomorrow's communities in person at the M Shed, taking place from 12 o'clock tomorrow. And that's led by Community-Led Homes West and VCLT, who are with us on the call today. And there's another whole series of events on the website, including the Festival of the Future City that's now live as well. So please do feel free to connect in with those other events. But without further ado, I'm really keen to get into this as part of the kind of narrative behind the Bristol Housing Festival. One of the things that we are really passionate about trying to unlock, to champion, to celebrate, to explore, and to look at how we remove barriers is this issue of how we create better social value, better social cohesion, how that supports communities to feel greater agency into how we build the right kind of houses and the right kind of community infrastructure around those developments. You know, building homes is not just about building homes, it's actually about how we support and generate, you know, healthy and resilient communities not just for today, but for the future of our cities. So I'm thrilled that we've got such an informed panel with us today who have all been at this journey, certainly a lot longer than I have, and have got the scars to show for that journey, but have also got stories to bring to celebrate with us today. So we're going to start, if I may, I'm going to hand over to Richie Miller from Bristol and Bath Regional Capital, and we will go through the series of panel and then lead into a Q&A. So Richie, great welcome to you, and over to you.
Great, thank you, Jess, for that nice introduction. I'm Richie Miller. I'm the Development Director for BBRC Homes, which is an impact residential property developer with innovative and affordable housing schemes. What we do, we catalyse development of new homes in sustainable communities in the west of England. We're working either in partnership with charities, communities and faith groups, or as a sole developer in our own right. In some cases, the groups we work with are struggling with repair costs associated with outdated properties, reduced grants, and in the case of some faith groups, dwindling congregations. BBRC can offer alternative, working with organisations to develop or redevelop sites to provide housing to those in need and to regenerate community facilities, which are often vital centres of the community. This all enables our community and partners to both further their social and their community mission and retain ownership of their assets as well at the same time. Some examples, we're currently working with a church group and we're developing an underused site, and we're going to turn it into an entrepreneur artist units that can be hired and rented out with some affordable flats, which will generate an income for the church to carry out more charitable activities. Another example is working with Haven Community Group. They're a charity in Knowle West, which runs a day centre for adults with disabilities. And we're working with them to redevelop their ageing and dysfunctional sites to turn it into a new purpose-built community centre, so a lot more modern, and also provide some supported living accommodation. We're also working quite closely with Bristol Together on a number of construction projects at the moment. Bristol Together, they train and employ ex-offenders during the construction of housing projects. This is vastly improving their life chances, and it combines two skill sets: the Bristol Together skill set of construction and the BBRC skill set of financing and bringing deals together, and the network that we've got to enable and unlock sites. And bringing these two skill sets together, we can really do some impactful and affordable homes and bring new homes to the market. And I'm going to stop talking there before I get carried away, and I want to hand over to Paul from Bristol Together to talk about a bit more about what they do.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Richie, and apologies for anyone who saw that I wasn't online then. One of the challenges of working for a community interest company is internet that sometimes gets pulled out on you. So apologies for that. Yeah, I'm Paul. I'm the Managing Director of Bristol Together. We're a community interest company who employ and train ex-offenders straight from the prison gates, getting them into construction. It's basically we're the guys who give people that first chance to get on the ladder to reduce reoffending and get back into society and get back into work. We often find that there might be guys who've never really engaged with school or training or work ever in their lives, and this is finally their one chance that they have to kind of get back into it. And then there's other guys who've literally just made that one mistake, and unfortunately when they come out of prison, no one will give them a chance to get back in. So it's about adding skills to the guys and girls when they get released from prison, and then adding to their CV so that they haven't just got a big gap in their CV where they haven't done anything for 4 or 5 years. We give them that employment history so that they can move on to the next step. Obviously, construction at the moment is a great field to be in, and there's certain areas of construction where people are a little bit more accepting of people with a past. There are people in construction who have been the other side of the prison walls, so it is one of those industries which is great, a great way to reintroduce people into the world of work, and we've had some really good successes. So Bristol Together have been running for about 10 years now. Overall, we've employed and trained about 120 recently released ex-offenders. Of that, our reoffending rate is around about 10%, which compares very, very favourably to about 50% in the standard within 12 months from being released. So our reoffending rate is low. A lot of the guys actually say that they're too tired at the end of the day on site to go and do anything naughty. So that's we'll take that as one reason. But again, it's the fact that they are seeing that their life chances are improving as they move on. So they get trained on sites working alongside skilled tradesmen, so that you can pick up skills as they go along and then add other skills to their bow as they come. We do new build projects as our main thing. So we're currently building 12 flats in Knoll West. In the last couple of years, we built 6 houses in Knoll West and 6 flats in Fish Ponds, which have all gone on to be affordable rented housing. So we're managing to bring back into the city new housing, which specifically helps with our guys because it's the kind of housing that they grew up in or that they can imagine living in. So there's a real element of pride in providing those houses for the Bristol community as well. So yeah, that's ultimately what we do. I don't want to hang on too much about it because I can for ages. I really think it's a great thing to do and a great way of providing houses as well as social impact. The challenges that we've got, that if anyone's out there looking to help us, is finding land, finding financing to do it, because it's obviously not straightforward construction work, and then access to ways of training our guys as well, so that they can make the next steps in their career. So that's basically what we do, and I'm going to hand over to Steve now.
Okay, thank you, Paul. I'm Steve Dale. I'm the CEO at Bristol Community Land Trust. So I'm just going to take you through a little bit what Community Land Trust is, what community-led housing is, and where it fits into the picture of social value. So Bristol Community Land Trust aims to build affordable, sustainable homes and inclusive, resilient communities. So we do this by acquiring and developing land ourselves, but also by working in partnership with other groups and organisations to bring land into community ownership. So we were established in 2011, and we were established around a site on the corner of Eastville Park on Fish Ponds Road, which became our first development of 12 homes, mixed tenure, so it's a mixture of affordable rent and shared ownership. And then we went on to acquire another piece of land in Lockleys, Bristol, from Bristol City Council, which has gone on to be developed by housing association Brighter Places. So BCLT is also the home of Community-Led Homes West, which is the community-led housing, CLH, enabler hub for the west of England. So that's part of a national network of hubs which support other groups who wish to acquire and develop land that meet the community needs. So to support other groups to do what BCLT has been able to do, and to support them to make their kind of housing vision a reality. So just a bit about CLT specifically. They're democratic, not-for-profit organisations that own and develop land for the benefit of the community. So they can act as long-term stewards of land and the assets on it. So these would be typically housing, but could be other community facilities like pubs, shops, cinemas, things of that nature. And the CLT will be able to hold that asset in perpetuity via an asset lock. So basically, those assets, whether it's kind of land or buildings, can only be sold or developed in a way that benefits the local community. So any profit would be reinvested into the community. And then a little bit more about community-led housing itself. I think what sets CLH projects apart from traditional housing developments is that the community's in the driving seat throughout the process. So that doesn't necessarily mean that people are building their own homes. But, you know, obviously that is an option and that does happen. But they will be deeply involved in making the key decisions at every stage in the development of that homes. You know, through to the ongoing management. So they may own the land, they may own the homes, but whatever the particular model, the communities kind of deeply involved throughout, and critically, the profits, as much as possible, will stay within the community. So the outcome of that is that there's an estimated £3 return on investment. So for every £1 invested in community-led housing, you get £3 return in terms of health and well-being benefits. So community-led housing's about more than just building homes. It's about building community. Now, the odds are still stacked heavily against the sector, and BCLT has faced its own challenges in this regard. And part of what we're trying to do is capture learning from our own experience and be able to share it kind of across the sector. But there is huge potential in the sector, and there's no shortage of kitchen table conversations happening by people who want to do housing differently. I think there probably won't be a person on this call who hasn't had a conversation about how they could do housing differently and better, which suits their particular needs. But to actually make it happen is another matter. And community-led housing projects are, not necessarily treated differently to other developers. They have to access the same lenders. They're subject to the same kind of timetables and funding and everything else. So we need to make sure, in order for the community-led housing sector to kind of reach its full potential, that we've got that consistent financial and technical support for those groups, and kind of favourable policies and incentives from local and national government to bring those projects forward, and kind of critically to enable those communities who would benefit most from community-led housing to be able to access it. Because at the moment you need an awful lot of energy, you need a lot of passion, you need a lot of kind of social capital and a good amount of luck and support to be able to bring forward a CLH project. And we want to make sure that it's a route to community development that's available for as many groups from as many different diverse backgrounds as possible. So I'll leave it there, but there's obviously a lot more detail in terms of what could be done in order to make that happen. Thank you. I'm handing it over to Lindy.
Hi, thanks, Steve. Yeah, hi, my name's Lindy Morgan. I've been working in housing for over 30 years now. I got involved, started in housing through going through homelessness myself and being a tenant activist through working with local authorities, housing associations, exec and non-exec roles, mainly in regen and development, which, even if you don't want to, you can't help but learn a lot along the way. So when we're talking about unlocking the community asset, I want to focus on the people, which, Paul is obviously already doing with Bristol Together. So I think step one is unlock the people, enable them to do that, because actually I think that's where the change is going to come, picking up on some of the issues that, Steve has raised. I have the real privilege of working with about, 4 or 5 different community groups, and it astounds me. I mean, there's a bunch of young women I'm working with, which is one group, 25 to 35, something like that. And they're happy to meet at 7 o'clock on a Thursday night and talk about the economics of development. I mean, who in their right mind now wants to do that? Well, they do, and they're so motivated. Now, that's where that wherewithal that there's just, all of the groups like this, but just taking that one group, that wherewithal that they have, that they've organised themselves, that they're putting in this much time and effort. I mean, who wouldn't want to back them? Who wouldn't want to be involved with them? Well, frankly, nobody wants to back them. It's really hard for them to borrow money. Everybody loves it. It's great. They're a great bunch of young people. But this is what we need to unlock. Once you've unlocked the people, and what we're lacking now and what doesn't have the maturity is the structures and the system itself for them to be able to match their wherewithal. And it's not just their effort. I mean, these people are saving. They're saving in the government ISAs, etc., to get their own finances together. So, they're putting their own money in. So that's what I want to see happen. And those are the types of groups that I work with. And I think for that to happen, we just have to think about, which is what the Housing Festival is all about as well. We just have to think differently about how we build. The Bacon Review recently, there's a stat in there that floored me. In the 1980s, something like 2/3 of new homes were built by SMEs. That figure now is 12%. So that's 88% of new homes are built by the likes of Persimmon, Crest, the big 6 developers who've got deep pockets and can ride out the system. And that has to change because there's no choice for people. The choice is very limited, and the competition goes on at the land level and not at the level that people want, where they can choose themselves. And given that it's probably the most expensive thing, and you buy or rent, it's the most expensive outgoing, and that's what community-led housing is trying to change and wants to change and is lobbying to change. And to do that, we need, I think it is radical change of the current fundamental systems that we have in place where decisions are made. So it is about devolving decision-making to communities. And I'm not meaning to be political about this, I'm being just practically. I don't care what party colour you are. This just makes sense. People are standing up and wanting to do something, bite their hand off, work with them. It will save you money and cost you less. Now, I can bang on for ages. So I'll stop and hand over to Simon, and I'm hoping that we get a good debate going with some questions and challenges. Thanks, Simon.
Thanks, Lindy. I really admire and welcome your passion. So it's a bit like to follow that. Good afternoon. I'm Canon Simon Hugh Jones, a title that gives a clue that I'm something to do with the church and hence have a church perspective on this topic. I'm also a chartered architect, formerly a director at Barton Wilmore and now in private practice. And I chair the DAC, which is the church's equivalent of local authority in terms of giving permission to develop. And my experience, particularly in national practice, tells me that house building is sometimes a complicated task, but generally a well-established process. But its focus is often technical compliance, numbers, percentages, standardisation, and a process that usually ends with plot occupation. In contrast, the church's ambition is to address the housing crisis not by building houses, but by creating good, desirable homes for people, where the transformational effect of having a home and being part of a community starts at plot occupation. That's an ambition that resonates with individual parishes. One example I know is in Bristol at St Luke's in Barton Hill. It's a parish that knows well the devastating effects of poor and insufficient housing, and that knows something of development, having previously all but built a new community building to replace a dilapidated church hall. And now that project involved the DAC and was how I got to know St Luke's. And it was sometime later that it came to me that theirs was a possible housing site. So I tentatively mentioned this to their newly arrived vicar, expecting to be politely told that housing wasn't for them, but it turns out that it was. They really wanted to explore this, but they hadn't got a clue how. So I did a sketch and it looked like 6 houses worked really well, echoing the housing that stood on that site before the clearances of the 1960s and the construction of the Barton Hill tower blocks. And I drew a street scene, and that became the picture that was worth 1,000 words. When we did some preliminary engagement with members of the church and the wider community, the response was, we still don't know how this works in detail, but that's what people in Barton Hill need. So at Luke's, we have the makings of something that's much more than just 6 plots. We're only at pre-app stage. We don't yet know by which model this project will be developed or managed, but we have the land, we have a design and a church community and a wider network engaged, enthused and very keen to make it happen. To create not just 6 houses, but homes that will benefit as many as 26 people, and to play a part in enabling those people to belong to a rich and supportive community. So I hope very much that the process that we all represent will deliver for those 26 people, and that we can create a repeatable model that works for other parishes with a similar potential to develop.
Simon, and to all the panel, thank you for those passionate presentations. And I hope what we've done there is given you a bit of a sense of the scope of this panel. There are different ways to engage, there are different opportunities, but of course what we're seeing is that within all of these different expressions, there's something about maybe the smaller in sense of both the land plots, smaller in terms of maybe resource, an opportunity to look at how those organisations can work in and through their communities. And I think that's fascinating. I just want to pick up on one question that's come up through the panel as you were presenting around this term affordable housing, because it is obviously such a legal term as well as quite an emotive term. And so when I think for us, certainly today, when we talk about affordable housing, we are talking about within the definition of the policy and planning rules of Bristol City Council. And I think just to be clear that there are other parts of the country where that can include percentage or market sale discount, so 20% off the discount price for house for sale. But principally in Bristol, it's a much tighter definition. So we're talking about affordable housing really being sort of affordable rent, social rental, shared ownership of the three principal models. So I put something up in the chat to take away and read. And I apologize that the term affordable housing has become a really complicated challenge in itself. And I think one of the frustrations perhaps of some of us trying to work within that area is to sort of, there is a problem of building trust when people don't understand what affordable means, because it is such a complex term. So I apologize for that, but there is a resource there to read. To kick us off then, I'd like to just pose a question that's coming straight away, and then to invite you as the panel to sort of bounce off this. And I think this is perhaps some of the irritation, frustration, opportunity that you've all alluded to, which is that community groups, so whether you're working with a church, whether you're involving with BBRC, whether you're an SME, community-led housing initiative, community groups, they're agreeing that they need to shape their area and be involved in that. But when it comes to real delivery, they're often under-resourced, perhaps inexperienced and disorganized by definition. That's not to be a criticism, but if you compare that to organizations that do this day in, day out, you take a church organization, in reality, they're going to do it perhaps once in a whole generation on that particular plot of land. So how might this put policymakers off or funders off supporting the sector? And how can the shared experience here work more collaboratively and collectively to bridge some of that gap about that lack of experience and therefore the lack of funding opportunity that may come through into those community groups? So who wants to tackle that first? Because I think you're all going to have some sort of thoughts about how you've done that. Steve, you go first and we'll bounce around.
Yeah, I mean, almost by definition, a community probably hasn't done this before. So, a community group will coalesce around a particular piece of land or a particular burning issue in the community, and they are a group of passionate people whose skills are that they know their they know their neighborhoods, they know their neighbors, they know what's strong about their neighborhood, and they know what's wrong. And so, community led, and so they'll see housing as a way of making a contribution to that community. But they've probably never done housing before, and so it's kind of not unfair and not inaccurate to say that they're probably disorganized and and are not experienced at development. The challenge then is for all of us to be able to support that group, to bring in the expertise that they need, the technical expertise that they need to be able to develop land. And as Simon alluded to, he had a church which had some land and had a congregation and resources and skills and passion, but didn't know how to do it. And so every group needs a professional support to come in and do that. So that's what we do at Community Led Homes West, and that's what we need to be able to continue to do. The other thing that happens if you've got, at the moment, what we've had, prior to the last couple of years, the sector's still quite young. We have a lot of excellent projects in our region, and but there's no coherent strategy. So those groups have, they may be groups of individuals who've come together to do something different, form a housing cooperative or a co-housing project. They might be a community anchor group who has seen a need in their community, a piece of land. And you've got a wide range of different organizations. But what we're able to do through having an infrastructure like the Enabling Hub in the west of England is we're able to capture the learning from each of those projects, and to be able to kind of recycle that learning back into, put it back into the pot so that the next group doesn't have to make the same mistakes. The other thing that we need to be able to do is to make those projects more attractive to lenders and to local authorities. So you have to think, what are the things we need? We need land, we need finance, we need communities, and we need technical support, really. And so part of what we need to do is, as a group of stakeholders, some of whom are lenders like BBRC, some of whom are local authorities, we all have a part to play in trying to maximize those groups' chances of success, and in trying to de-risk that investment a little bit for the major lenders to come in. And that might mean sort of underwriting some of the risk, or it might mean being able to, provide, finance. And I can see Lindy.
Yeah,
Lindy.
I do. I want to come. Because I want to turn this around. I think the question is. I understand why the question's been written how it is, but it's that the question itself is a problem, because it comes at from the point that the community is unable to do something. Well, actually, the community's got a shed load of skills, experience, and knowledge that no other organisation has got. The planning department don't have it, the local authority don't have it, and the funders don't have it. They are so best placed to know what their issues are and what their needs are. And that's an asset. And that organisations consistently fail to value that, because, and they don't mean to, it's not an intentional thing, it's just that's the practice. The local authority knows best. We're the paid professionals, we come in and that's what we're paid to come in and do. And obviously I'm paraphrasing slightly here, and it's not about knocking anyone in particular, but if we were to turn that on its head, and because that's what I'm sort of talking about with Canopy. They know their needs. They also know their affordability. And I want to come back on that question too, because there is an issue with affordability. Yes, Jazz is completely right. There's different definitions and legal definitions of it. But what there isn't is a definition that actually bloody works. Actually what we're supposed to be saying is, it's supposed to be a percentage of your income. So, it can't be 80% of the market if your income is if you're actually not earning an income, you're on income support because you're not paid a proper wage in the first place. So that's it. I'll shut up now. So
that's great. And I think, Lindsay, just to pick up on that. So Steve's obviously pushing that from a thinking particularly about community-led housing initiatives and communities grappling. And I suppose I'm thinking then about the challenge you bring, which is not underestimating the value of, and for me, that's about building trust as well, because, one of the biggest barriers in planning, as we all know, is that when you don't get that consultation right and these things land, that can become a real barrier. So there's a huge opportunity here, isn't there, of re-establishing trust between both community-led housing, but also other housing that's taking place. How do we do that in a way that community agency and community participation is valid? I'm also just going to broaden that question out to both Richie and Simon and Paul from a different perspective, both as an SME builder, but also as a social housing enabler, and sort of thinking about church groups bring other land in. What's your challenge back on that in terms of how do we really support those communities to get the right funding in place and to be organised, because there is a scale issue here, but there's also an opportunity to unlock some of those smaller parcels of land. So what's your views, and take it as you can.
Yeah, I'll go first. The community is so important from day one, even before day one. You need to get the community involved because they know what's in the area and what needs fixing and what needs doing. And if you're trying to build something and get community involved, it's not going to work if the community aren't involved from day one when you first start talking about it. I wouldn't say they're disorganized from the experience I've had with dealing with different communities and church groups in particular. It's more about resources, time resources being the main one. They're not developers, they're not builders, they're not contractors. They've got their own day jobs, their own families, their own life going on. They know what needs to be fixed and what needs to be done. It's just unlocking that knowledge in the right way to enable what it is we want to do to build that community up. You've got to have the relationship and talk about it, get everyone involved, and then we can provide that SME knowledge to come in and deliver what the community needs and wants and what will be a community asset, rather than telling them this is what you're going to have and giving it to them. what do they need, help them to achieve that. So yeah, I agree and disagree with different parts of that statement that someone's put in. Do you want to?
No, that's great, and I think what I'm hearing again, there is an opportunity of the right partnerships there and again, I suppose the work that Steve does as well. Like, how do you really build on that experience other people have had? I mean, Simon, what about from your perspective in working with the church? I mean, that's something you're going through now. Is that how you sort of respond as well? Similar?
Yeah, I mean, there's a reality in churches that the responsibility sits with people who've probably never done this sort of thing before. There might be an incumbent or a church warden and with a completely different background. I totally agree with Lindy that they are nonetheless the experts in their context and their setting. They are the holders of the vision and the passion for what they want to do. So they need help. I think there's there is a danger that when you bring in the experts and their formulaic way of doing things, that's counterproductive. I heard it once described as seagull consultancy, where they fly in, shit all over it, and fly away again. There is an issue about resourcing. So a parish might come to the DAC, the committee that I oversee, and say, well, we're thinking about doing housing, and then we can provide some help and some signposting and some connecting up. And the example I gave at St Luke's was slightly different, because I took that hat off and put on my chartered architect hat and got my pen out and started drawing. The most self-sustaining resource is the parish that's a bit like them, who's already done it, who's got a model, who's got those connections, who can tell you about the things that they did that you really don't want to do, how to write a really good funding application, how to prepare a compelling case for a pre-app or a planning application, but also to share something of that experience and the outcomes. Because if you've got that idea that your little site, it's only a few plots, but actually that's going to be transformational for people's lives. You can see how they did it, you can learn from their process, but you can meet some of the people whose lives have been transformed. And if that doesn't sort of fuel the process, I don't think you're going to be able to do it.
That's great. And Paul, I just want to pick up with you there, because again, you come from a slightly different perspective, and I think this is where we start to look at or maybe touch on the intersection around the sort of the Social Value Act, for example, where yes, you're building a home for sale, but you're also looking at building affordable homes and then using this sort of social value idea of bringing people into the jobs market who need skills and training and opportunities. Where are you seeing, the opportunity and sort of the Social Value Act biting for you? So when you're procuring for sites or trying to buy sites, or really are you just in the market and you're having to make your own way, and it's very difficult to get traction with people looking outside of that sort of blinkered, these are the outcomes we want, X houses, and you're going, yeah, but we're bringing all this additionality to serve the community. What's your experience with that, and how encouraged or discouraged are you about the progress we're making in that area as a sort of enabling systemic change?
Yeah, unfortunately, at the moment, we're probably not quite there in terms of we're fighting against developers to get land and to provide houses. Obviously, the way that we do it is not the cheapest way, because we are employing and training guys who've never been in construction before, and there's the obvious costs with that. The area that we've got opportunities is we generally look at brownfield disused sites, which have already become an issue for antisocial behaviour in the area. They're the kind of the mid-level sites. They're too big for the one-man bands, and they're too small for the bigger boys to worry about. So we're in that kind of niche level in the middle of 6 to 12, maybe 15 units. That it's a little bit bigger than someone off the street could borrow from a lender, but it's not worth the bigger boys going for. So we are in that nice little area, and we do sometimes get a sway on potential sites, and obviously now the plan is to do a bit more work with BBRC and be able to access maybe slightly bigger sites that we wouldn't have been able to find any funding for in the past.
And I think what's interesting with that model, of course, is what we're talking about is greater collaboration, aren't we, where those pockets of land can come forward. So whether that's partnering with community-led housing initiatives or BBRC can unlock that, or churches, where then how do they then partner with those right team, as it were, to drive that social value even further. But the question is, how's that measured and valued the other side? So can the funders unlock it? Do they appreciate it? And I think one of the things that we're excited about, but I think we're at the beginning of the journey. The Social Value Act is relatively immature still, let's be honest, but it is maturing. How do we move into outcome-led procurement? So as a city, when we think about housing, one of the things that strikes me is how we're thinking about how do we build the houses that A, the city needs, and B, that are driving an outcome around making the health and the mental well-being of the population better, and the planet healthier. So how do we, that's the outcomes that we need. And of course, your contribution to that then becomes very powerful and palpable in those local communities. But I want to bring a challenge here, one of the questions that's been posed online, because I think this, for a lot of people, may be looking at it from a different lens, from thinking about the government's target, 300,000 homes a year, and we're indulging ourselves here and talking about micro sites and small sites. And so that there's a good challenge here, I think, around how does this particular sort of small micro sites and the community-led housing initiatives, where perhaps I'm going to be sort of devil's advocate here, but maybe the criticism could be, but it means it moves slower. I don't get my delivery as quick. I can't just sell the land off and get it done. So how do we balance hyper local needs against the wider city, regional, national challenges, particularly under that, whether we agree with it or not, the government's target is 300,000 new homes per year. So what's the balance in there between this model and the partnership with and the influence into those broader and larger, scarier numbers at scale that the government's pushing? So I'm going to open that up to the panel. Who would like to have a go at that one? I'm sure you've all got an opinion. Linda, you go first and you can set a tone. You're on mute, Linda. That's just probably a good thing.
Hang on. That's okay. I don't think the two are competing. I think that it's delivering homes, and it's delivering the right homes in the right places to fulfil the right housing needs. I mean, we've got 6 big developers in charge of the whole show for however many years, and they've failed. What they've created is a distressed housing market that for 30 years I've been working in housing, and we've had a housing shortage and a housing problem. So I think we can have the big target, and I think that this is, when you think about rural housing, exception sites, people priced out of villages they were born in, etc. So I don't see issue, and I saw that question in the Q&A. So I think the two are hand in hand, and also picking up on Paul's point, some of the land that they're looking at. And about that output of social value is a lot of the sites that community-led housing deliver are sites the market isn't interested in because there isn't the profit margin there. So actually, and so I also challenge the view that it's seen as expensive, because actually nothing was going to happen there because the market wasn't going to touch it. And someone's prepared to do some hard graft and actually make that site, but try and make a go at that site. And of course, a lot of the effort that the community put in doesn't cost anybody anything, which is your social value. So I think that it's tiresome, isn't it, that these myths are sustained, because they are myths, and it's time, and we need to bust those myths.
That's a great answer. Would anyone else like to come in on that? Because I think that's anyone wants to challenge and add to her? Yeah, Steve.
I was just going to add to what Lindy said. You've got sites where nothing was happening. That land was providing no value for the community, and in actual fact, it's attracting antisocial behaviour and everything else. And what you're doing is you've got passionate people who will come in and do what that community needs in that space, and they're able to lever in additional resources, so not just their own time and their energy and their skills and their knowledge and all of those things, but they're able to lever in grants and support from central government or grant funding trusts or grant making trusts or foundations or whatever it might be. So as Lindy alluded to, it will bring forth sites, and we've got many examples in our region which no other developer would have been able to develop, and Lindy's been involved in several of those directly, but where you have had, because the community has been at the forefront of leading it, the community has not objected to what would otherwise have been a hugely controversial kind of housing development. And we've got examples in Lawrence Weston and in Southmead, for example, and in rural areas where you wouldn't have been able to deliver housing by any other route. So just to kind of build on that.
Richard, do you want to come in on that, or should we?
No, I'm in agreement with what's been said
Yeah.
already. Any house that's brought to the market is valuable and adding impact and makes a real difference because there's such a housing shortage. Doesn't matter if it's the commercial big boys building penthouse apartments or it's a community 1-bed house, 1-bed flat. It makes a difference to the market. There's a need for it. So
yeah, and I think just before you come in, I think just reflect on that as well. When we think about the complexity of the failed housing market, and you know, and maybe this goes back to Lindy's point that, you know, one of the problems is that for a lot of people that own their home, there isn't a housing crisis. You know, in actual fact, that the housing market is pretty good for you because your asset is going up. So we have to really understand that we're talking about how can the community, how could the big house builders respond to that failed market, which is for people that either can't afford a home to rent or buy at all, or for people that are desperate to buy a home and can't afford one. So there we do need, don't we? We need a cross-cutting response to, you know, what affordability means. And for some people, it's absolutely an increase in social housing. So when we look at the challenge of building back, you know, our social housing stock in the UK, when we've got right to buy, how can we do that at pace? That becomes really important. We need these big schemes coming forward. But the sorts of schemes that we're talking about today are critical, particularly when you start to get into the ecology and the environmental debate. How do we build more houses on brownfield land that is complex to unlock? And this is where, again, what better example of story and narrative about difficult, non-viable sites that can be enabled to come forward with real trust and civic engagement. So I think we mustn't, in my view, see this as a competition between different players. It's actually, there's a beautifully complex ecosystem that needs all of these flowers to bloom, but also with an understanding of social value. So that social value does mature and that starts to bite in terms of real delivery. So for example, could some of the bigger house builders start to have to work with organizations like Paul's? Because we know that we get better social out, and that's a win-win, so that they can deliver some of the site tools. So it's this collaborative piece that I think is really challenging and interesting. Steve, you were going to come in, and then I must take a couple more of these questions.
Yeah, just to say that if we're just competing with, you know, we talk about does community-led housing deliver? So if we're just competing in terms of building units, then maybe we can't compete in terms of speed or volume or, you know, or cost. But if you consider it as we're not just meeting the housing challenge, we're meeting other challenges in the community, and that the impacts of our developments will be not just on putting a roof over people's heads, but on building a community. Because through the very act of being involved in, as Paul was alluding to, you know, in Paul's example, his workforce is developing new skills and experiences. You know, likewise, any community, through being involved in the planning, the development, the management of homes, is learning new skills, and often. So if we take Sheldon Road, for example, which is in Lockleys, which is the other BCLT development, we've got colleagues from Ecomotive working on a big self-finish project. So the idea there is that the community hasn't built the homes; it's been built by a developer, but they are self-finishing. So they're involved in the fitting out of bathrooms and kitchens and all of those things. And so that community has been built before anybody's moved in. So those 50 families will know each other before they move in. And we need to get better at being able to put a price on that and being able to say that we're not just delivering housing, we're building communities. And therefore, when we talk about grants and support, we're not just talking to the housing delivery departments in the councils or national government. We're talking to, how are we saving money elsewhere along the way.
Yeah. And of course, looking at that in terms of, our experience in COVID, the strength of, or the difference in experience of where there is strong community and how those communities have navigated COVID, where we've built environments where there is no community, we start to have a sense, don't we, of the the impact, positive or negative, of the way that we're building. So how we take that learning and see the value of community is something that, and to encourage us, I think the Social Value Act is starting to try and do the knotty problems. There was even something that came out from the government recently about how do you start to really put a financial cost against well-being. Now, these are complicated things, but that's the debate, isn't it? How do we start to build real wisdom into our process and our decision making, because it can't just be about cost in terms of the outcomes we deliver or numbers of homes. I've put a link in there as well, Steve, to that event. There is an event about that self-build model later in the week that people can attend online as well. So going to drive for a few more questions. We've got 10 minutes. We've got a few questions coming in. So let's shake this up a bit. So dive in as you see fit on these questions. So the first one says, are we running out of suitable sites for community to build on? And I guess the follow-up I'd add to that, and if we are we wasting our time? Because one of the things that I'm taking away from today is it's really important that we learn from each other, and we probably celebrate our successes and our failures, so it's quicker the next time. So are we running out of suitable sites? And if we are, what are we going to do? Because that's a fairly short scenario we've got. So who wants to sort of respond to that? Simon and Richie, why don't you take that, and then we can have any follow-up comments.
Short answer for me is probably no. I don't think we are at all. I think the example I gave in Barton Hill is just a small site. In the process of making connection with people and talking to people in the community, we've already been offered 3 other sites to sort of piggyback off that. And you mentioned about the Social Value Act. And that's people being interested because they actually see the real social value of what we're trying to do. So, well, we get what you're trying to do. And yeah, there may be sites that don't have a particular value to the mainstream house builders, but they're pretty much offered to to hook those on and get them involved. The other statistic that I'd add is St Luke's is a typical parish church, inner city parish church. There are 16,000 Anglican churches in the UK. Now, not all of them will have sites. Some of them will have land, some of them will have glebe land associated with them. But even if a small percentage of those could look at a site like we're doing at St Luke's and say, yeah, we could do that. That's a pretty good land bank to be following up.
Yeah, and of course, some of that follows on the Archbishop of Canterbury's commission, doesn't it? Looking at how the church can bring solutions into that housing crisis as well, and again, the right type of housing. So that's a great. And
I would say I do quite a bit of work in London, and that changes your perspective. You think there's no land here, and then you squeeze and you squeeze, and you suddenly get 5 units in, and make somebody £5 million. So it's about context and perspective as well.
Absolutely. Richard, did you want to add to that about availability of land?
Yeah, from where we are and where we're looking at doing things, there's not a shortage. There's lots of availability. The challenge is unlocking it, whether that's the finances, the resources to do the work, or just get an agreement from all the various stakeholders for what you're going to do with it and the timelines you're going to work to. So at the moment, I'd agree there's no shortage of sites. Challenges, lots of challenges.
And I think, one of the things I think, just to comment on that, of course, is it's also causing more creativity about what we mean by available land for community-led. So looking at the work Noel West Media Centre are doing, where they're looking at freeing up sites in between plots so that you're taking existing some of these social housing plots with larger land. So there's an awful lot of creative opportunity. And again, that I suppose going back to your point, Steve, actually, if we do it well and we do it right, it becomes a model that other people can use. And it also creates the pathway through the planning process, so that again you have a useful precedent, because there is a resource issue here about the more that we're doing millions and millions of things, actually if there's a precedent that people can go through. So celebrating these stories, understanding the mistakes other people have made, learning from that, helping the process be simplified is going to help unlock more land. So I think we're all probably agreeing on that. There is plenty of land. And back to the challenge of this debate happening in Bristol right now about green species, greenfield and brownfield. One of the great things that our community-led housing and our churches and our BBRCs can do is really help us unlock these brownfield sites, which are more difficult, but they need to be released. So a good opportunity, if not a challenge there. Right, next question. Let's dive into this one. Lots of smaller schemes will need reduced land prices or grants because of the social value element, i.e. you're trying to do more difficult things that cost more, but to add social value. So are there grants available to community groups, and can we get reduced price land? Lindy, why don't you take that one to start with what you've done?
Well, very limited public funding available. And that's another thing actually in the Bacon review, to actually make it mainstream, to make funding for community-led housing. So Homes England, which is the government quango that's responsible for investing, the government investment in affordable homes anyway, and across all kinds of tenures, has a program, an affordable housing program, which is usually, I think the current one runs for about 3 years. And the Bacon Review is saying that an element of that, or additional funding, should be purely for community-led housing schemes. Completely agree, absolutely. So it's, instead of making it some sort of weird, odd thing that some strange communities do, it actually becomes an option that a community can legitimately choose, and there is funding for. So no, there isn't enough funding available, but it is good to hear that the government, I think they are generally supportive of it, and it's good to hear that they're having some sensible and hopefully serious conversations about increasing funding.
And I think I put a link to the Bacon Review in the chat as well, because if people are interested, that's a really important review to read. Richard Bacon is a massive advocate and campaigner in this area and has been for a number of years. But I think the other thing to recognise is Homes England have also put a lot of funding into the SME market. So you've got a couple of things happening which start to perhaps at least play more favourably into this sector in terms of some of the money that's being released and trying to broaden out the supply chain of homes in the UK. So it's not straightforward getting hold on the funding that's there. People like Steve can help organisations. BBRC have huge experience of working with the grants that are available. So again, my recommendation, I think it's reasonable to say, is don't start from scratch. Find out people who've done it before, and because there's not huge funds out there, but there are opportunities for the right kind of ideas. So good luck with that. We're going to move on because I've got a few more questions that come in. So I think this is a great question that we can probably wrap up on today. But if the central government or local government can do one thing that can help this particular subsector, if you like, of the housing industry thrive, what would be your recommendation or request? Now, this can't be just none of us are prime minister for the day, but thinking practically, thinking in the near term, what is a reasonable request? And thinking about the Bacon Review, what's in that? What would be your recommendation? And maybe each of you can comment on this from your own experience about what you'd love to see from a policy area change. Why don't we start with Lindy, and then we'll go around. I'll call you out one by one.
Obviously, I've got loads of ideas, but I'll just pick one, and that is the planning system change. So why are not an element of Section 106 on that provision? It is not for community-led housing in some form or another. Great.
And Steve, perhaps you can add your comments on that. I think that's a great point, Lindy.
It needs to provide consistent funding for the UK network of community-led housing enabling hubs like CLH West. So it's one of the recommendations of the Bacon Review. But it's a pipeline, and the pipeline will thrive, and it needs to continue. And at the moment, with funding being up and down, then the pipeline falters, and then groups don't get the support, and then banks, they don't become such a sort of a sound bet for banks to invest in. So we just need that consistent support.
Thanks, Steve. Simon.
I think mine's a sort of connecting up people kind of answer. But wouldn't it be a joy to engage with a local authority and get a common view? At the moment you can have really fired up conversations with people in the housing delivery team and send an application in that lands on the desk of a bright and well-meaning graduate planner who just reads policy. So it's the connecting up. It's if a local authority could do what people like you, Jez, are making them do, and be a little bit more joined up and connected up and can do, that would make a world of difference.
Yeah, it's building that shared vision, isn't it? I think it's a key part of that challenge. Richie.
Linked into what Simon just said, cutting out some of the red tape, or a lot of the red tape. Speaking to people at the council in particular, they're all on side and all want to make things happen, but there's so much red tape for the interdepartments talking to each other before they come together with their one group answer they put out. It's a slow process, so cut some of the red tape.
We're all developing patience and perseverance, that's for sure. And Paul, over to you. Just if there's one thing that you could see change in terms of particularly that social value offering, what would it be?
I'm going to be 100% selfish. Basically, the amount of money that's saved by employing and ex-offenders and reducing the reoffending rate, etc., the cost saving for the government, if even a small proportion of that was passed on to the people who are doing the work to create that social change, that would make a huge difference.
Yeah, it's that joined up thinking, isn't it? And again, can the social value act be a part of that solution so that we really understand that value proposition that it's bringing? So great. Look, we've run out of time today. We could probably, if you left us in a coffee shop, keep going for the next 3 or 4 hours, and we put the world to rights. We don't have time. But I think thank you for joining us today. Thank you for your questions. Please join in. As I mentioned, there are more events happening this week, but more importantly, if this is an area that you want to go on, and you want to support, you want to be part of that opportunity, then we'd really encourage you to connect in with some of the organisations represented today, because there's a great opportunity. And Bristol is learning, and it's learning together as a city. It takes, I think we've really tried to hit on today, this is not a self-build community-led housing versus traditional development. We need all of these things working together to create that great ecosystem. So thank you for time. If you want to see about self-furnished, there's another event on that tomorrow. There's another community-led housing. Again, if you've got time, do come and join us in person for that event tomorrow at the M Shed. It leaves me just really to say thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to our panel, to Paul, to Steve, to Lindy, to Richie, to Simon for your passion and your perseverance. Keep going and celebrating those stories together and sharing your learning is a key part of this journey together. Thank you to David and to Urban Splash for sponsoring our event today, for their commitment to looking not just at houses, but really creating these places that people thrive and flourish in. And thank you as well to SWPA, our other sponsors as well. So thanks for being part of the festival. We will follow up with you and we look forward to continuing to help just shift the narrative a bit about how we do this together to help our city and our community.